Brayden Ainsworth grew up chasing the footy dream, and he caught it. From small town WA to the big stage of the AFL, he made it. But behind the scenes, the pressure to perform, the need for validation, and the obsession with being in peak condition were quietly eating away at him. When Brayden was delisted by the West Coast Eagles after a short rollercoaster career, the identity he'd built his life around was suddenly gone, and so was his sense of purpose. With no structure and no direction, he quickly spiraled into a dark place. Constantly justifying starving himself and exercising to extreme excess, Brayden became very sick while being unable to fully accept the reality of his eating disorder. Anorexia was the end result of clinging to an identity that had turned against him and a desperate need for control. For a long time, he didn't have the awareness, the words, or the courage to face his demons and speak his truth. But he sure does now. A few years on from rock bottom, Brayden's working with young people to promote mental health in schools and using his experience to break the stigma around anorexia in men. This is a story of what happens when the dream doesn't work out and how falling apart can open space to build back up stronger than ever. This is Brayden Ainsworth.
Welcome to Young Blood, the volunteer video podcast dedicated to young men's mental health. I'm your host, Cal McPherson, and this is a platform for young men and their loved ones to share lived experience stories and show that no matter what you're going through, you're not alone. Suicide is the number one killer of young people, and changing that starts with speaking up. So let's do it. This show touches on some tough topics that may provoke strong emotions. If you find anything in this chat distressing, please do whatever you need to do to look after yourself.
Brayden, can you pinpoint when you started really looking at how your body looked?
Yeah, so my sort of, body image, the person I see in the mirror, challenges, thoughts, patterns, all that sort of stuff started when I was probably just getting into high school. So it would have been year 7. So that transition from year 7 into year 8 is when I really found that I became really fixated on the way I looked. That came from a whole different reasons, from, getting bullied, seeing things. I started to get a little bit of social media, started to see other people. And then I also started to see, athletes and that sort of stuff and what they looked like. And that's where that comparison started to come, with looking at myself and, getting bullied for being overweight, plus looking at myself and starting to believe I was overweight. And that's sort of where it stemmed from in that, period of, 12, 13, 14.
And were you playing footy then?
Yeah, I started Auskick, so that's what it is here in WA, in Perth. So I think when you can, 5 years old, you can start. So I was playing, all sports, because I'm from Esperance, which is a little country town. So, you play footy, soccer, cricket, like every single sport you can think of, we sort of played down there, winter, summer. So, yeah, I was always playing footy, always playing sports still. And that was the main thing that actually gave me a little bit of love and passion in my life, realistically.
Did you have those big aspirations to play professionally from a young age?
Had the aspirations, but it's a thing that, you never actually believe you're good enough or be able to make it, especially being in that country. You always really hear you're disadvantaged, you live in a country, you'll never make it, you're not good enough. And I think I'm like every kid that plays AFL football, for example, or was like starting at 5 years old in any sort of sport. For me, the dream was to play AFL football or to play NBA. So it was one of those two things when I was growing up in terms of sport-wise, and always had that aspiration, but it was always just like a thing that was just there. It wasn't actually like I'm going to go and do it at that age. That didn't come till later on when I actually started to build that self-belief and confidence, but it was always in the back of my head, like, I wish I could play AFL. And when people would say, what do you want to do when you're older? Or you do that in primary school, what do you want to be? I'd always write down an AFL player or an NBA player. So always had it in my head, but the actual realistic, thoughts was like, you're never really going to make it. It's just a dream, or a big wish.
How much did that influence your body image? Because you're looking at AFL players, NBA players, seeing the kind of nick that they're in as a young kid, and that's what you want to do, ideally, professionally. How much did that factor in?
It was massive when it come to, probably more around year 9, year 10. So when I started to get, 15, 16 years old, that's when I really started to compare my body and stuff to AFL athletes, and it wasn't just AFL athletes. It was like swimmers. It was like Cristiano Ronaldo, soccer players. Like it was sort of all athletes in all arenas and what they were doing. Especially then you start to, because I love my basketball. You look at NBA players and then you look at NFL players and how athletic they are and that sort of stuff as well. So I was constantly comparing with any sort of sport that I looked at, and I guess on social media it was the same thing. I was following people that were really athletic, really lean, and in the sporting field, and that's what I would start to tie, what I looked like and my ability to then compare to, what they looked like, and especially appearance rather than ability at that age anyway.
And how old are you, Brayden?
So I'm 26 now. Yeah, I don't like saying that though. I'm getting old.
Mate, I'm 31. You got plenty of time left. But I asked that because that's 5 years difference. So I remember going through school, social media wasn't really a thing until about year 11, and that was Facebook. So there was no TikTok, Instagram, maybe just starting out, but it was just photos. Like there wasn't reels, so there wasn't that massive body image contingent to online media back then. Like there definitely was when you were probably just about the first going through that
Yeah.
at school where that became really big. And yeah, I think we can't underestimate the impact of just being bombarded by videos, not just of professional athletes where we expect them to be elite, but now, and I know it's a massive problem now where it's other kids, or somehow there's teenagers in the USA who are 15 who look like they're 30 and are somehow benching 4 plates, and you think that that's what you should be doing, and so there's this feeling like you're behind or you're not measuring up. Did that weigh on you back then?
Yeah, everything you said is spot on. It's one of the biggest things that we see all the time now, and there's obviously different things that play into that. But for me, it was, and I actually had this conversation the other day. Like I looked at changing my Facebook. Can you remember doing this? You would go look at changing your Facebook profile picture, and you're like, "Oh, is this cool enough? Will this get enough likes?"
Yeah.
Like that sort of stuff. So, like we were talking about that the other day to a couple of my other work colleagues, and I was like, this is just such a big thing when I was in high school. Like had to have the cool profile pictures and all this sort of thing, and all of that. It constantly, was weighing on me. It was like, oh well, but this guy got more likes than what I got on mine, and then they got more likes on their photo. Does this mean I'm not good enough? Like just all this sort of stuff. And then, when Instagram came around, yeah, and Snapchat was another thing, all these social media platforms. But then you can go on, YouTube and whatever your algorithm is, or if you're using your parents' computers, whatever they're sort of watching or using phones, anything can pop up these days. And I guess that comparison then can double down, like you just said. I can see someone nowadays, you can see TikTok and someone from America that's just doing some ridiculous stuff and lean ads at 14, 15 years old. And like I still do it now. I'm not saying I don't compare myself. I still look at other people, but it's just so much harder to navigate, especially the younger people that are going through it now. And because I still struggle with it myself doing that, and I think we all do. But I guess I would love to see what I'd be like now, back like 10 years ago, growing up, and trying to battle and navigate my own life through the social media and lens that we all look through at the moment.
What was your relationship like with food?
Growing up, it was the complete opposite to what it was when I got older. High school, it was basically, you could say, binge eating, I guess, but it was more comfort. The easiest way to describe it is like I felt like I was getting broken up with and every day and going and eating chocolate to make myself feel good. You see those rom-com movies and things like that, and that's literally what I would do. I would, chocolates, cool drink, all that sort of stuff. Like we got McDonald's eventually when I got to high school, all that sort of stuff. That was making me feel good for a bit, and that's how I dealt with it, because I didn't know any other way to talk about or open up and share and express, because of this thing that I was chasing to be what it means to be a man or masculine, or however you want to define the traditional masculine traits. But I was the complete opposite. I was what you would more call feminine traits of soft and vulnerable and actually wanted to share and open up. And that's probably because of my upbringing with the people that I was surrounded with. So I really struggled to do that, which then my food thing that was my only outlet. So it became a comfort thing, especially during high school. And then that flipped towards the back end of year 11 and then into year 12, where it sort of became the opposite and actually developed into a better relationship, more around just eating healthier. And that went into when I moved to Perth to play waffle football. And then it became a restricted eating post, like in my AFL career, footy career, and then same with post football, it completely flipped. So it was indulging and overeating, and then it became a restriction towards the back end.
Going from being an overweight kid to a very fit late teen and early adult, how much was the validation a factor from people?
It was massive. I think that first bit of validation came when I never had a partner realistically, or a girlfriend, you want to say, in high school. And then towards the back end of year 11, I started to get attention from a girl. And I guess the validation from that became, okay, well, obviously I must look attractive to someone, right? Not to everyone, but to someone. And that validation then just gave me, I guess, a little bit more confidence. And I wanted more of that. But again, I still couldn't look in the mirror and say, you look good, you're attractive. But it was more the things like, I shouldn't have even been saying that. Like, I shouldn't have been saying I'm lovable, I'm caring, like all that stuff. But I got so fixated on what the other people were saying about me. And then my mates would be like, mate, you're looking really fit, you're looking well, you're running well. And I was just like eating that up. That was my favourite thing to get, sorry. And the more I got, the more I wanted to just dive into it even more, because I was just getting all this praise and love for, I guess, the actions that I was doing and then the body that I started to create. Because obviously I got leaner and all that sort of thing. And then when I got to, I guess, the footy system, mate, that validation became my identity. Roughly, like it was, you're lean, you got a low skin folds, you're fit, like all that stuff. And I just like ate it up. That's all I wanted. And then to the detriment, because of how much external validation I wanted, I had no self-worth, no self-esteem. I couldn't get it internally, that I just constantly chased it, and it eventually wore me down. But it was the biggest thing that I craved, and then it was the biggest roadblock that ended up like losing myself realistically.
Did you used to post a lot on social media, like shots of your body, like anything to try and get more of that validation?
Not really. Not when especially like not when I was younger, because I didn't want to post what I looked like, so I hated it. And then even I was always, the comparison thing always held me back, how other people would perceive me and judge me. So I never really, and I still do that now. Like that's why I don't post crazy amounts. And it was, even in football, you don't want to post certain things in football because people think you're egotistical or cocky or the tall poppy syndrome. Although you've worked hard and tried and you're doing what you will love to do, you still feel that you're going to get judged or perceived to be egotistical. So I didn't post things, my body, like anything, because I was still worried about getting teared down for doing something that I love and I've worked hard for. So it was still a challenge, and it was so I never really posted. And here and there, I'll do like now I will but it's not like if I go for a run or something and I'm just like out filming for some content or whatever, and my shirt's off, like yeah, whatever. But I won't deliberately post a selfie just because I've got my shirt off and I think my rig looks okay to get some validation. It's actually it's the opposite. It's like I still don't want to post that because of some of the other people that I see on the internet, and I'm like, no, because this person will then compare me to that person who's like rig is 10 times better than mine. But I'm like, well, like, so there's still that. Like I still don't think that I'm lean enough or chiseled enough or however you want to say it. It's just part of life. And I think we all sort of go through that, but I'm way more comfortable and more confident in my own skin now. And I'm not even near as lean as what I ever have been. And I think that is a growth from my end. And that's what I just feel like content and happy about.
Why did that validation mean so much to you?
I think because I was just like lost and I didn't know really what I wanted to do. I didn't know if football was even the thing that I loved, but it was the only thing that I felt I was actually good at. And outside of football, I literally didn't know anything else to do or what I wanted to do. I was just going to do a trade in high school. And then if football didn't work out, I was just going to get a plumbing apprenticeship in Perth. Like, I was just sort of just going about life. And because I was getting told I was actually good at something, I actually felt seen, right? I felt heard, and I felt like people respected me because I was good at that. And I said if I lost that or I didn't get that praise, then I was feeling worthy, not good enough, and I guess a little bit lost. So that's where that external validation sort of kept feeding, was from that.
But all your eggs were in one basket.
Yeah, literally all in one basket. Yeah. Yeah.
What
So
about
I don't
your
know if I didn't
parents?
get
Would they give you validation as you were growing up? Were they encouraging? Was that partly why you looked for it elsewhere or not related?
sport was like, yeah, I used to get validated by my old man. I guess this is what parents do. They validate like, different things that whatever you may be good at. But like in sport, dad was always validating, how I played on the weekend. But he was always pretty honest too. It was probably more, and I guess I probably wanted his, like I really wanted his respect, especially. And the only way I felt I could get that was through sport because that was the only thing I felt that I was actually good at. So I guess there's a little bit from that comes from the parents' validation. But my parents split up when I was like, can't even remember it, when I was like 2, 3 years old. So mum was obviously a little bit different because she didn't get to watch too much sport because, we lived with dad. So mum was always just craved. So it was respect from dad and love from mum because you just felt like, she's so far away from you. All you wanted to do was get that love from her. And so that was, I guess, a little bit different from mum, but from dad, it was the validation from sport. Where mum, it was the validation from who I was as a person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's factored into it a bit overall. I get what you're saying with the respect from dad, and I can relate to that. I played high level basketball all through my teenage years, played Div 1 and was in state squads and that sort of thing. And that was me and my dad's main bonding thing. Like he would take me to all my trainings and all my games. And as I got older and I put more pressure on myself and he'd come and watch the games and half the time I'd be worried about not playing well enough and I'd be looking at his reactions and then that would get in my head and then I'd play worse and then get the quiet trips home in the car and just feel so bad about myself. And I know, and my dad like always said how much he loves me and being a massive supporter of everything in my life. But sport was a big thing for us. And that as I got older, a huge component of it was wanting to do it to make him happy, even though he would get upset or disappointed because he was disappointed for me because he wanted me to be better for me. But then I would be mostly disappointed because I was playing well enough to impress him. And so there was like that interesting dynamic that goes on there. And I know he still feels bad about it to this day. Like he's done a lot of self-development in the last couple of decades and he still feels like he could have done things a bit differently back then, but I think it's a pretty common dynamic between sons and their fathers where they bond over sport and they both want it to go as well as it can. So yeah, I understand some of those feelings that you're talking about there.
Yeah, I find it so fascinating that young blokes, if they do play sport, it's the respect from, if they, some people obviously aren't lucky to, like us, to have an old man in their life, but otherwise then they seek their coach's validation or their teachers like that. And it's through that way of sport, I find. But it's funny that cycle that you were just explaining, how you go from this thought, then he feels bad, for you feeling bad, and then it's just a complete. And I love how you just said your dad's been doing self development because the hard thing is like they're just parenting for the first time, but they didn't know any of this stuff. They were told
That's
so
right.
many different things and how to parent, how to teach, how to bring your boy up to transition into a man, but they're not taught any of that. And then we're still not taught that in schools anyway. So for him to be doing that and you to be helping him on that path, like that's respected both of you because it's so awesome to see. And I just love hearing when if you're, so you said you're 31, I'm assuming your dad might be over 50, for him to start to change his ways,
He's in his 60s,
thoughts. Yeah. There you go. So like for him to start to do that is a credit to him and a credit to you because it's very easy to just get stuck in our ways and, oh, it's a waste of time. I've already done this for 50, 60 years, So, yeah, I love hearing that.
Very proud of him and love him very much. He's a special man. He's gone super far with it. I mean, he was one of the first people to introduce positive psychology and critical thinking into schools because he was a teacher and a principal as well. So he actually got right into it and now volunteers for Lifeline. And so he's like, yeah, really come a very long way. And I often hear this from men is as you get older, you can appreciate your father so much more and you can understand why they were the way they were based on their dad. I look at my grandpa and then I hear from my grandpa about his dad. And so you can see this trickle down effect of men are just going based off their own experience and trying to be better than their dad was in certain ways. And so you might grow up as a kid thinking like, oh, my dad's a hard ass and he's really tough in this way. But then you hear about the parenting that he got and then you hear about the parenting that your grandpa got and you're like, oh, okay, it's making sense. And then as you get older, you just have more compassion for, yeah, they're just going through it for the first time. Being an adult's hard. I haven't had a kid yet, but I know that it's going to be a lot harder. And so, yeah, you start to realize they were just doing their best. And I think the most important thing with my dad is he always said he loved me. And I knew he did, even when it wasn't always perfect. And there were times when people got upset or whatever, but I never doubted that he loved me. So that's definitely something he got right.
Yeah, it's so powerful. So, Joel, and like you said, like the generational, you could say generational, like there's parenting, generational trauma, like it all trickles down, but they're doing it for the first time as well. And just having that curiosity of wonder why dad parents like this, or wonder why mum does this, or wonder why they do that. And just getting curious because there's so many things that I still don't know about my dad and my pop and that I'm so curious to know, Dad, what was it like when you were growing up? What did pop teach you? What have you changed? What did you get passed down? Like, why did you parent like this? I think that's cool because it builds that relationship with your old man. Or if you're that's either way. If you're a boy or a girl, so I just think it's so powerful to be able to have those conversations because we can judge parenting styles so easily and judge our parents or criticize them for what they say and do and to us. But if you get curious about it, like I wonder why dad's doing this maybe it's because of what Pop did or his dad did or whatever that could be. I find that so fascinating because you can learn so much about someone just by asking questions, but wondering why and how they got brought up as well.
And so important for people to not be stuck in their ways totally, like people who are just completely shut down to change and say, oh, well, that's just the way it is. And so don't allow themselves that space to try to think outside of the patterns that they've always had or try to develop. If you can stay open to it and have those conversations and look into some of those resources and be able to have the self-awareness to confront yourself as uncomfortable as that can be and go and work with a psychologist or whatever it takes and just keep on growing, then you do get better and better at life and you do get wiser and you can look back at certain chapters and say, look, I wish I would have handled this better or that better, but that's just life. The point is that you are getting better and you learn from your mistakes and you become a better, stronger, more valuable human being as you go along in life, as long as you don't shut yourself off and say, oh, this is just the way I am and like it or love it or too bad, and actually stay open to that growth. And I've seen so much of that in my dad throughout my life and really proud of him for it. And I know that he's a happier person because of it too. And then you see plenty of people who don't have that kind of attitude and because it's too painful a lot of the time or they don't know where to start or it's too confronting, that they'll just stick to what they know, even if that's not really serving them.
Yeah, 100%. I'd love to know, like, when did your, I guess, self-awareness sort of journey start? Like, were you younger with your dad, I guess, implementing these things into schools, or were you still a little bit like later, only recently?
It probably started looking into it more at about 21 because a mate of mine put Eckhart Tolle book in front of me, like mindfulness meditation, which Dad had gotten into and spoken about, but that was the first time someone who wasn't Dad put it in front of me, so I started getting a bit interested into it and got a bit into the meditation and that sort of things. And then I think it's just been gradually gaining awareness over time. Thankfully, I didn't have a whole lot of self-awareness from until I was about 22, I reckon, to started. So luckily, I've managed to keep myself mostly out of trouble long enough to develop into the man that I am today. And then that was massively accelerated when I was 25, losing my mate to suicide and starting the podcast and having these conversations. And I think you have experiences as a man, and I went and lived interstate and worked elsewhere and had to actually navigate through challenges and have developed along the way. Still made plenty of mistakes like lots of us have, but just slowly been learning, and someone who's really curious and gets more curious as I go along. I love reading, love listening to podcasts. I'm always consuming some sort of bit of content all the time, just find life fascinating, and have been really blessed to be able to have this platform and have all these conversations with people like yourself, which has been massive for me as well. So yeah, it's a gradual and very much ongoing process, Brayden, as I'm sure you can appreciate.
Yeah, it's definitely a process, but just be able to start, 21, and then obviously really dive into it at 25. Like your listeners are just listening for the first time or just want to get started. Like, is there any books that I'm always looking for new books and new podcasts, but any like books or podcasts you'd recommend for, I guess, myself, but also people that are just dipping their toes into this space of self-development and self-awareness that you'd recommend?
Yeah, there's a really nice short book that's an absolute classic called The Alchemist that I would recommend people
Goated.
read. Well, you've already read that one, but that's just like a really nice starting point. It's fiction, but it just makes you think about what you want out of life and what's actually important in a way that's nice. So that's one that sticks out for me. As far as podcasts, Modern Wisdom by Chris Williamson is a fantastic one. Diary of a CEO is another really, really good one. Look, I honestly, these days I don't read much self-development. I've done a fair bit of it in the past. There's some books there behind me.
Yeah,
I think
into the bookshelf.
yeah. So what's one there? Ryan Holiday. I'd recommend Ryan Holiday.
Yeah.
So I got right into Stoicism. Pretty typical for the bros, I think, to get into Stoicism. But yeah, Ryan Holiday's a really good modern day interpreter of Stoicism and makes it really accessible. He's got some really good books. I'm not religious, but in terms of my principles, I'd say it's pretty close to the Stoics in how I try to live life, and not in the stereotypical way of people think of Stoicism, but in the way of waiting to respond rather than just reacting, and being calm in chaos, and wanting to be someone who has agency and wants to serve others. They're sort of the things that I live by. So I'd say have a look into Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius, go right back to the Stoics and read some of that stuff. Then like for some, in terms of a bit of a roadmap, Jordan Peterson, I am a fan, especially of his early work. So 12 Rules for Life and Beyond Order as well. I think a lot of men, and it's why he's very popular with young men, are looking for actionable steps that they can actually take to improve their lives that apply pretty broadly. I don't agree with absolutely everything that these people say. Like, I'm not an acolyte of anyone. I don't think that they're 100% on everything. I think everyone needs to be sort of taken with a grain of salt, and they need to be looked at within a particular context, and we have to take issue by issue. But I think I'm big on personal responsibility, and that ultimately it comes down to you to take small actions to improve your life. And if things aren't going as you'd like them, there's always something that you can actually do to start to change that. But you have to be the one to get the wheels in motion. I think there's some speakers out there that talk really well about that sort of thing. I'm just trying to look behind me. These days, man, if I'm honest, I'm mostly reading fantasy books because I like to just get out of the personal development space sometimes.
Yeah.
There's the work and the podcasting, and we're talking about this sort of stuff, which is brilliant, but I like to just get into a bit of escapism. So most of what I read these days is about werewolves and vampires and that
I love that.
Yeah. What about you?
No, that's awesome. Mate, pretty much the podcast is very similar. Same so my first self-development was actually The Power of Now. I got that through football, which was like a hard day. It was like a hard read early because that was like my first one. And then I went into The Alchemist, and then I love The Courage to be Disliked. That's one of my favourites. And then like The Obstacle is the Way. So that was obviously, as you know, Ryan's work there. So, and podcast-wise, but I'm a big Jay Shetty and Mel Robbins. They're like two of my faves. The way they can say things and like really complex ideas and then make it simplified and so obvious and so easy to understand. That's off the back of obviously Chris and his stuff as well that you've already talked about. But I love how you talked about like listening and responding. Like listen, like, and I love that whole conversation. Even when you're listening to someone else and they're taking it with a grain of salt. Because for me, I think, and especially in the work that we work in, and even in podcasting, like, are you listening to respond or listening to understand? Because, like you said, everyone has their own perspective, own ideas, own philosophies. But are you listening to just respond and disagree and judge what they say, or are you listening to understand, and then you can actually be like, oh, I agree with a little bit of what they say, but not everything. Doesn't mean you don't have to listen to them like Jordan Peterson or whatever it might be for you. But I think that's really important. I like how you touched on that as well.
Yeah, just thinking critically and being open to having the discussion. Like I always say, I'm very happy to have my mind changed, but I want to be able to have the conversation with whatever that is. And I think these days it's like if you don't agree on something, then you can't be friends. It's kind of like seems like the polarizing attitude that's promoted if you were to just take it from what's online. But I'm very happy to, if I know someone who's got a strong opinion about something that isn't my opinion, rather than just not talk about it or judge them for it and then say, oh, I guess we're not mates anymore. The discussion respectfully and try to understand more about why people think a certain way. And I try to listen to other podcasts and other voices that are on the opposite side of the spectrum to the people that I naturally feel more comfortable listening to and hearing from, because you can easily fall into like, oh, well, this validates me more, and it is kind of an echo chamber of these things that make me feel more comfortable. So I'm not going to look at any of the other views outside of this. And that's really easy, especially when the algorithm will just serve you more and more of the same thing. And that's fine. Like you can live in that echo chamber and be convinced that you sort of know everything and that anyone who disagrees with whatever that stuff is a dickhead and you don't need to listen to them. That's pretty lazy, and I think you end up missing out. So I think I'm definitely a centrist where I think the truth's somewhere in between, and I can certainly agree with more right-wing stuff and then listen to some more left-wing opinions and then hear about how a particular issue is spoken about from both angles and see that one side conveniently leaves things out that makes a big difference to whatever the argument is. And I just think you have to take stuff issue by issue, and rather than say, oh, well, I don't like that person as a person, so therefore everything they have to say is invalid. You just take it based on what people are saying and the actual facts. And then also not thinking that you have to have an opinion about something as well. I think these days it's like, oh, everyone's supposed to have an opinion on whatever's happening in the zeitgeist. And there's plenty of stuff, most stuff, that I definitely am not an expert in or don't have enough information about. And so I think just shut up about that. And if you want to learn more, listen to some people who know what they're talking about. But yeah, you don't need to actually have an opinion on absolutely everything that's happening that you don't know about just because you want to feel like you're part of it, or that your opinion's necessarily important for that. Not that people shouldn't say what they think and that your opinion's not important, but yeah, I don't buy into like, oh, I've got to respond to absolutely every trending topic, because a lot of stuff I just don't know.
Yeah, normalizing that is so important. Like that's something that I've come to understand is someone asks me a question on certain thing, I honestly don't know. Like, and then otherwise, like, I make something up that I've heard from what you might have told me or what Chris Williamson podcast might have told me, and I can be like, yeah, I can tell you about this, this, and this, but I'm like, realistically, I don't really know. So, and is it really my opinion, or is it just their opinion that I now believe is my opinion? I think that's also pretty important. Like, normalize. I don't know. I don't really have an opinion on this. I don't have enough information, or I literally just don't know anything about it. But we all like, oh no, like I have to have an opinion on it. But it's like you don't. Like normalize, and it doesn't mean you're dumb or stupid. Which again, it comes back to fearing that we're not smart enough, we're not good enough, or. But it's just like I just don't know. Like it's freeing because then you don't feel like you're lying either.
The wise man knows he knows nothing.
Yeah, it's very true.
What was it like when you pulled the AFL jersey on for the first time? Did that stack up with the expectations?
Yeah, 10 times. Yeah, it was incredible. Walking out of the race, and then I was lucky enough to start on ground and get the first touch of the game. So when you get a touch straight away, I was like, oh, all right, let's play. Like it was nerves out the way. But it was incredible putting that jersey on for the first time and stepping out there and being on the so-called big stage. It was a pretty liberating feeling because I did work hard. Like I worked hard to get there, and as if you play any elite level sport, you got to work hard. It was just a nice reward for effort, time, and energy put into your dream, and then to live that was pretty incredible feeling. But the best feeling was after, like the Gatorade shower, celebrating with friends and family, and just the boys. That was the fun thing, like walking up the oval, then getting a Gatorade shower, and the boys hugging, laughing, smiling. That was it was a pretty incredible moment.
You must have got hooked on that.
Yeah, well, it didn't last long. I got dropped 2 days later. Didn't play the week after, but I did. And you want that again, and you just want that feeling because it was probably the most liberating feeling that I've nearly ever experienced. And you just want that. When you feel that good, you just want it even more, and you chase that feeling again. And I think I had another 2 more times that year, and then it was emergency for the grand final, which obviously West Coast ended up winning in 2018, which was my first year. And being emergency for the finals and the grand final, like you were just chasing that feeling. And then seeing the team win the grand final, the 22 players that played, and seeing that really doubled down on, wow, imagine, like, I feel this good, we won as a team. Imagine winning it, how, like, I just couldn't imagine the feelings you'd be feeling in that moment. And I wanted that. And then, so chasing that again was something that, I put all my energy and time into.
Because you were on a list for a few years there, but you didn't play a whole lot of games. So that must have been tough, given that you'd had a taste of that. You were so close to it, but you couldn't find that consistency to keep getting it again and again.
Yeah, and it's also what you want, because all you want to do is like play AFL. You don't want to be playing in the waffle, the VFL, or you know, you don't want to be playing in the twos or the seconds, as you'd call it. You want that feeling of playing AFL football, and I played three games in my first year, and then like I said, the emergencies, and then the next year I was emergency a couple of times, but I'm pretty sure I didn't play a game. But then my third year I played about 9 or 10 games and played in the final, so that was probably my most consistent year. And then the year after that, I think I played like 1 or 2 games and then was emergency 3 or 4 times. That it's just, it was just such a roller coaster. And when you don't understand your emotions and have any emotional intelligence and, you play, you get all your, I guess, validation, or you get all your love and praise and happiness from an outcome or a result, or how many touches, how many goals you kick, how many tackles, how many clearances, and then one game you don't play well and you don't know how to deal with that because you think like, oh, I played bad, so now it's going to take me another 3 weeks to then get selected because they'll say my form's not good. So then you're miserable and then you can't be happy. But then you play a good game and you're like, well, I'm going to do this for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So you can't sit in that happiness or that joy because now you're going to be like, well, you move on straight away. So the inconsistency and not being able to deal with those emotions and just riding the highs and the lows like so deeply really affected my mental health, but how I crave that feeling of playing more AFL games.
What was it like to be training so hard and wanting it so bad and having already played before, so you knew you were right there on the level, and to still have so many games where you're not making the team?
The majority, I reckon 85% of the boys would say the same thing. I worked hard, but I overworked too. So I was definitely one of the hardest workers, but not one of the smartest workers. So there was blokes in there, like great examples are like Shannon Hearn or Josh Kennedy's probably one of the great ones. They knew how much they had to do to perform on the weekend. So they would work hard, but they wouldn't overwork. But I started to overwork, which had a detriment to how I operated. And it was my energy, it was focus, how tired, I was just getting so tired. And then because you're working so hard and not getting selected, then you feel like, well, they just don't like me, they hate me, they just don't think I'm good enough, this is bullcrap, it's unfair, should I get traded? I just had that victim mentality. But realistically, maybe when I look back now, maybe I wasn't good enough or my form wasn't as good, or if I communicated, asked more questions. But it was so hard to deal with because I was like, I just want to play football and I'm busting my bum to play. I'm working so hard. I'm doing more than anyone else. I'm doing more extras and I'm not getting rewarded for it. And that was really hard when you're putting all the effort and you don't see the reward was super challenging, especially at that age. You know, you're still going through self-development, who you are as a person, and all your reward is coming from, I guess, performance-based, because that's what it is. It's a performance-based industry, and that's as an individual, but also as a team. And that's so hard to deal with as a young bloke.
Yeah, and you've just continued on the pattern that's worked for you to that point where you put the effort in, you had a lot of natural talent, but you put the effort in, you slaved away, you had the right mindset, and you got all the way to the AFL. It doesn't matter what sport it is, there's a lot of young guys and girls applying that mindset, getting to the top level, and then it doesn't mean that you necessarily make the field or the court at that top level, because now you're with the best of the best and they all have that attitude. And so you've gone through all those younger days where it's pretty much working out, you're getting that return on investment, and then you're not, and it's like, well, what the hell, I'm just doing everything I can. And then I guess that comes down to politics or just brass tacks of the other guy in your spot is performing better than you right now, and you've got to deal with that.
100%. And then you make then you justify what your own thoughts, like, you know, oh, they just don't like me, or they like this guy better than they like me, you know, or they're just playing me out of position, like all these sort of things. But what I came to realize, and like you said, that was all I knew though. It was like all football, and I'd worked so hard for football. So like you say, that's just what's going to get me. It got me here, so that's what's going to get me there. But what I've come to realize, being out of the game for so long, the best players in the game, when they're at football, they're 100% there. Like, they're training hard. You know, when they walk in the doors at the footy club, they're all in. But when they're away, they can actually switch off. Where when I was away from the club, I was like, well, when I was away from training, when I was in Waffle and back home, I'd still work really hard and do extras. So I was doing that, like stretching, mobility, recovery, saunas, beach, walk, like all this stuff. Could never switch off. And I think that's what's so good about women's sport. If it's not a full-time gig, they are incredible. Why I mean that is because, like, the AFLW, when the West Coast team was just coming through, but they still do it now. They've got to train, they're maybe studying, but then they also have a job. Like, that's three things, like a full-time gig. And then they're still coming. They go to either uni all day, work all day, then they train at night, and then they got to do weights, they got to train, and then they got to go home, sleep, recover, and then come back. And I think that aspect of it is they're actually working on something and building themselves away from football. And because I got this lockdown, this identity of he works really hard, like that's his identity, he's fit, like all this stuff, that was becoming who I was because I had nothing else away from football. So that's why I was like, this is who I am, this is what's got me here, that's what's going to get me there, and that's my identity, I can't change that. So I couldn't switch off, which was really hard. And even though I was getting told, like, nearly every day, mate, you got to take it easy, relax, switch off, it was like, no. This is what's got me here.
And you're just convinced because of past experience that the more work you do, the closer you get to the goal. And it makes a lot of sense what you're saying there, that if sometimes, especially if it's rehabbing an injury, like I've had this recently, I had this quad injury for like 6 months that was really annoying me. And so I was doing everything I could to fix it and like obsessing over it and just couldn't leave it alone. And then I found I kind of just got over it and I was like, well, like whatever, I'm sick of this. And in the last month it's resolved because I've like done the least to it, you know? So that's not the best example, but sometimes, you can just overdo it and you're actually having a negative effect on your overall performance because you're just overthinking it, you're overdoing it, and it can be so hard to let that go. Like, and I think maybe more blokes who haven't played professional sport could relate in, you really want to train every day, but if you train every day, that's actually going to be detrimental to your overall progress. Like, you might want to train because it's good for your mental health, you love training, you don't feel good if you don't train, but if you train 7 days a week, you're going to go backwards.
Exactly right. And that's literally like, if I didn't train as much or didn't do extra touch or basically didn't exert so much energy, maybe I'd have more energy come game day. So be able to run more, be able to tackle more, be able to be in more contests because I was fresher, you know? So there's so many things like that. And as you know, as you would know, and that could be work in life, you know, you put all this time and effort and energy and hours into, but how's your output? You know, is your output at 100%? When you're there because of your or are you just showing up 60-70%, which by the end of it, that's how I was showing up because I just didn't have enough energy. And that was obviously through other things which we talked about earlier. But then even that's what ended up over exercising, what you talked about. Yeah, it's good for my mental health, but that's what sent me into the darkest parts, because I was just chasing that and so lost, and thinking that was the right thing to do, where taking a break, relaxing and switching off would have actually got better, you know, return, I guess, for effort and in so many different areas of my life.
So what happened in the end with your AFL career?
Yeah, so basically 4 years, hoping to go on to have a 15, 20-year career, but yeah, got told and that my career's up at West Coast, being delisted, and um, that was, mate, it was the worst news that I've ever received, due to the fact of like the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment that came with that. But the loss of identity was massive. It put me into a spiral that I never would have ever imagined I would have fallen into. And losing that, I chased it again because of the title and the respect, the love, the likes that I thought came with that, which then November was the draft at the end of that year, end of 2021, which didn't happen. And then not getting that, I chased the mid-season draft. And then once I realized I'm not going to make it, that's where everything just, I guess, compounded over time and ended up sending me into a pretty dark place.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so basically, well, I got delisted in October, and then I was like weighing like 70 kilos, right, for off the back of this, eating disorder, anorexia, stuff, body image. And then I worked myself up to 82 kilos over the next, over that off season. So come March, when I just about to launch into a few practice games for Waffle, was the first practice game, and I was, fit, firing physically, but mentally I was nowhere, because I was just so fatigued on chasing this identity that I played a few games and I thought I was playing okay, but getting really poor feedback from coaches. And then I filled in for a game of AFL for West Coast, because it was COVID and things like that. It was top up players, and I filled in and played, and I had a shocker and got subbed out at half time. And from there, mate, everything just went downhill, to the point where I just realized, like, you're not good enough. And these stories just turned into you're worthless, you're not respected, like all this stuff. And then I ended up in hospital come August of that following year. So it was a very quick transition. It was all off the back of anorexia and body image issues, and basically admitted to hospital for those things, with a classified as an eating disorder. So, and then, mate, I thought I felt shame and guilt when I got delisted. That went to a whole nother level. Like the embarrassment of that, and being a male in hospital for a body image issue that stereotypically blokes don't go through that. How do I tell my friends? How do I tell my family? How do I even hide this, was the first thing. I do not want anyone knowing that I'm in here, So that was the darkest spot that I've been in. And like the weight dropped, the body was shutting down like fully. Yeah, which is scary when a doctor says, mate, you may not make it through this, and we've booked you in for certain things in ICU to get replaced in your body because your body's shutting down and you may not recover. So that's how dark it got for me.
When did the anorexia symptoms start, and how quickly did they go downhill?
But when I think about it, like body image, anorexia, it all started when I was so young, and then it just continued, and it was something that I never opened up and talked about, but always had these tendencies. And I always knew in my head that there was so much self-worth and self-esteem coming from the way I looked. And then, mate, I don't know how to describe it, and I don't think you'll understand it. When you're in this mindset, especially that process of, it was basically 3 months that everything just went from, like, I was here and then just went bang in the space of 3 months. And that quickness of, losing the weight, your body shutting down, but then the mindset of like, oh, no, I'll wake up tomorrow and then I will start to eat more food or start to not exercise as much. But then you drop a little bit more weight and you're like, oh, wonder like how low I could get to. And like, I've never had those feelings before in my life, and it was until then. And I couldn't also comprehend it and understand it. And then I started to lie to myself, which all comes with this, I guess, disorder that you talk about. But, mate, I would say I had it all through football, because there was, wanting my skin folds to be super low, wanting to look really lean. but they're not actually acknowledging it. And I wouldn't say I had anorexia then, but I probably did, realistically. And I definitely had the tendencies, because there was days where you you wouldn't eat, I'm fasting, like all this sort of stuff. But it was just masking and lying to myself to justify what I thought and how I'd get my self-worth and self-esteem. But that 3 months is really where that, I guess you could say the anorexia thoughts and feelings and tendencies and I guess action sort of came from, was in that real quick time.
So you consciously starve yourself, but you justify it.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, yeah, very easily too. And because you can manipulate, you can lie. And then as soon as you justify your own answers, you start to believe it, your own thoughts, and you're like, yes, that's why, that's why. And then if someone says one more thing to you, like, oh, you're eating really clean, or you're really lean, or you're really fit, like any other ways like that, then it reinforces, okay, yes, I'm doing the right thing. This is getting what I want. What you look for, you're going to find. And I was looking for those compliments where people were real worried and asking, are you okay, mate? You can talk to me. And I was like, they were there, but I just shut them out. I did not even notice them. And now I look back, so many people were there for me and helping me and asking me, but I didn't listen to any of those voices. I was listening to the voices that were reaffirming what I believed in.
How do you understand now how that comes down to control?
Oh, so much. So much. I wanted to control everything. And I think we do as humans. We get so worried about things we can't control because we want to be able to control everything. And I could control what I was eating, how much I was exercising, especially when I was outside football, for that year where I got delisted. I was controlling my whole life, because that's all I wanted. I wanted to be in the driver's seat of it all, letting someone else dictate, what I would eat or how I would operate once I left football. I wanted to take that. Even, mate, I remember even the hub, we had a COVID hub. And then in my last year of football, when you travel with the team, there's only certain things, you have a buffet, but there's like 2 meat options and there's some veggies and whatnot. You couldn't control that. And even in that, man, I was like asking like the dietitian, oh, can we get this? Can we get that on the menu? Like stuff like this. Like I wanted control over everything. And then when I couldn't have it, my you could say anxiety, my worry, my fear just was skyrocket. Like that game I filled in for West Coast in 2022, not being able to control, what was on the menu or what they would have for food there, what I could have for breakfast, all that stuff. Like I was frazzled. I was literally like shaking, was so worried. So that's how much I needed control and scared of not being able to control so many things. And I got I was so frazzled and so worried and so scared. And, was nitpicking like little things like, can I eat this? How much of that can I eat? Realistically, didn't feel my body right. And that's again why I didn't play that well, because I just had no energy and stuff like that. But yeah, control was the biggest
Did
thing.
you recognize what you were doing when you were doing it?
Yeah, because that was when it started. So after that game is where I went downhill, and up until we flew out on Thursday. Up until that Thursday, mate, I was flying. Like I was eating so much food. And I felt good, felt energized. And as soon as I got that phone call, I flipped back into the mindset that I had in my last year at football. And as soon as I had that, that's where I just went downhill, because I was like, this is what I did when I was in AFL. This is what I have to do again. But if I'd stayed doing what I was doing, I probably would have played better. Because 2 days out, I was like, nah, you can't do this, you can't eat that, you've got to do this. And I went back into old routines, old habits, old thought patterns. If I had just done what I'd been doing, I reckon I would have been fine. But again, I was like, I'm walking back into this football club that I had an identity at. I've got to keep that identity, because that's what's going to give me validation from them. That's how they're going to respect me. That's how they're going to like me. But that's how they know me. They won't like this other version of me, so I need to be that version. And then when it went downhill, getting subbed out and not playing well, mate, I just lost control.
And that's all in your head, isn't it? Now you reflect on it, you're very obsessively thinking about it in those black and white terms where you're convinced, like, I have to do this, they're expecting this. And what you're talking about is, in that frame of mind, you're saying, the football club expects me to be this version of Brayden that doesn't eat food and is like particularly lean. Like that's what really matters to them. But really, that's just what matters to you in that headset that you're wearing. That's not something that they're really judging you on at all. In fact, the idea that a professional footballer isn't fueling themselves properly is going to be the thing that stands out. It's not going to be like, oh, what's Braden's body fat percentage? But you were just convinced of something that was only actually real in your head.
Yeah, 100%. It's absurd to think about it now. And the thing is, it comes back to communication. I didn't communicate anything. I didn't ask any questions. So I was believing that I knew what they were thinking. Realistically, I had no idea what they were thinking. And they were probably thinking the complete opposite, like, we probably need to get him eating more or looking better or putting on more muscle, more strength, or maybe just building his own self-belief up. But in my head, I knew what they were thinking, apparently, and I would justify that. But realistically, I didn't communicate what I was going through, and I didn't ask them anything. So these judgments and things just can spiral because we think we know what everyone else is thinking. But realistically, we got no idea unless we asked questions.
You're painting a picture of what I think's a very common experience, like not necessarily eating disorders in men, although there is a lot of that. We just don't hear much about it. And big respect to you for talking about it because it's really important. But what is common, regardless of whatever the disorder is keeping it all in your head and just being convinced of whatever that voice in your head is saying and not sharing it with anyone else and not giving it any opportunity for anyone else to poke holes in it. And that voice getting louder and louder and more convincing, and you're just like living this story that you're making up without realizing that that's what you're doing. And the longer it goes on, the more used to doing that you are. And then that becomes ultimately often a very dangerous thing to do. And it's a huge factor in a lot of suicide is just keeping it to yourself and making yourself sicker and sicker, but not speaking these thoughts that become fundamental out to the world. So like most of your day, you're having this conversation or certain triggers are making that voice, and that's taking up a huge amount of your time, but no one knows about it except you.
Yeah, exactly right. And I'm not saying it's so easy to go and open up and talk to people because it is hard because, you know, this podcasting, I'm opening myself up and so are you every time you do this to how many ever listeners, tune into this episode or tune into you. And if you go on public speak, like, I get to do with work, I share parts of my story, and that now has become easier, but you don't have to go and tell your whole life story to every single person and to a crowd of 50,000 people. Just if you can open up to the people you trust, that's real courage. Like you don't have to, like I said, courage isn't going and speaking your life story to every single person you meet. But the first step can be actually just talking to people that you feel comfortable talking to and opening up to. And you don't have to tell them everything. It's just maybe little bits and pieces here. But it is so, so powerful because, as soon as you can get out of your own head and start to understand that these beliefs aren't real and they're just stories that you're telling yourself. But as long as you keep telling yourself this story, the more you're going to start to believe it, and the harder it is, obviously, to get away from it. But like I said, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's finding ways to guess break that cycle. And everyone's different in their own ways. It could be breathing, running, meditating, journaling, talking, but it's being able to unpack why you're telling this story and why you actually believe the story in the first place and what even made you tell yourself this story, and then is there really any evidence off the back of what you're telling yourself is really important to know as well. So I think that's important stuff.
When did you first start talking?
I started talking probably to people. So I would have been, well, just when the day I got told I was going into hospital because I had to tell my dad and my mum, but that was still not a thing I believed. I still didn't believe it. I didn't accept it. And this is what I mean, mate. Like I was in hospital, been out of hospital for 2 years and still didn't acknowledge it, accept it. It took me, so like I said, I'm 26 now. I admitted it for the first time roughly about a year ago to the day, really. And that was being 2 years out of hospital. Never talked about it, never told anyone, never shared it, just hid it. because I was so ashamed and embarrassed about it. And now, in the last year, has literally been the only time I've really talked about it. You know, and that's what I mean. I haven't, since it wasn't day one that I got into hospital that I talked about it. It was literally 2 years after that I still acknowledged it and accepted it, which was really hard to do. And I did it in front of people I knew as well, which was very scary. But that was the first time that I really accepted it and understood it and acknowledged it, because I was like, well, it's what you've been through. Like, you can't hide what you've been through, what you've done, but you can own it. And you can't let that then be your identity and hold you back. And accepting it's been the best thing ever. But it was so hard and so difficult, like I've said. But yeah, it was literally only a year ago, and now it's going on 3 years since I've been out of hospital. So yeah, that's how long it's taken me to open up and talk and share.
Because acknowledging it makes it real.
Exactly. As soon as I said, "Wow, I had anorexia, I had an eating disorder," it was like, that's real. And when it's real, that's the scariest thing, because it was like, okay, like I've went through this. And then it was like, well, when it becomes real, then wonder what people will think, wonder what people will say, how will people judge me. But it was the real factor that was the scariest thing. Like, acknowledging it and like, okay, I'm going through this, or I've been through this, literally identifies it as it's a real thing. And that's the scariest thing.
You can't face it and actually progress until you accept it.
100%. There's literally no way, because even if you half accept it like I did, still, there was still so many things going on. Like, I was in there because I was over exercising way too much. So that's how I said. I said, oh, I was just over exercising, which was a part of it was true, but the real depth of it was I had an eating disorder and I had anorexia. You know, so which I think people get like maybe 40, 50, 60% of the way there of accepting and acknowledging it. But it's that last, 40, maybe 30% that will let you become free, that we're just so scared of. And if everyone's different, it's the fear of being loved, being judged, being criticized. That's sometimes why we can't fully accept it. But it's liberating, it's freeing. The amount of love and joy that you can bring into your life when you accept that you're imperfect, that you've been through this or you're going through this, but there's also a way out too. And the hard thing is, when I was, well, everyone now, like if I was going through a difficult thing now, there is no, I guess, idea or visual that in 6 months' time or 12 months' time or 18 months' time that I'm going to be better by talking and opening up. There's no visual of that person like that I can see, and that he's happy, he's living his life, he's joyful. But then, like, a great example is if you go to the gym, for example, and as you probably know, you do a little chest session, a little arm session, you get a pump, you're like, in 6 months' time, that's what I could actually look like. So then you keep going, you keep training because you know that's what you could potentially look like. But in life, you open up and share your problems, you don't know that in 6, 12, 18 months' time that you could look and feel 10 times better mentally and physically by just being free. So that's what I find is really hard to get across to people as well, because we want to see things, we want to visualize things. And that's why I think power visualization is really important as well.
Not when you've never done it before, when you've never opened up in your life. You've got absolutely no idea how that's going to go.
No, exactly right.
And how did it go? How did people actually respond when you were totally honest?
Like, they were so loving, caring, empathetic, genuine, supporting, and they were like, mate, yeah, we sort of knew, but we just needed you to know. But the love and care and support that I got was incredible. And I think that's, like, I was thinking it was a burden to them, but they were like, mate, this is you not opening up and you not talking actually was the burden, because of how much stress, anxiety it was giving us, how much worry we had. And now that you're opening up, accepting it, acknowledging it, there was so much freeing on their life, which is a pretty profound thing to understand too.
And that's so true for the people around us who love us when we're struggling. The hardest thing that I hear so much is not being able to get through to that person, or them not letting you in and just feeling like you're coming up against a brick wall. And that's the really scary thing. And that's the thing that makes people feel totally disempowered and like they don't know what to do. Like they'd so much rather hear all about it than not be able to get through to you at all, feel like there's this divide and they can't reach you. That's what's really scary for people who love you. But then when people are mentally ill, as you've got experience with, you don't see it that way or think of it that way at the time because you're not thinking logically and you can't get that in the moment. But I'm sure in reflection you can understand. But it's not about passing blame on people when they're really struggling from not being able to bridge that gap and let people in, because there's all that fear there.
No, there's so much fear there, but if you can just let it go, as hard as it is, like I've said, it's so freeing and it's the best. It's honestly the best feeling. And I'm not saying that I don't have days where I struggle or have tendencies, I have thoughts, because I do, and I'm not fully recovered yet. But like being able to open and talk about it has, when I have these thoughts, it just makes it so much easier to deal with as well.
So when you're seriously emaciated and the specialists are telling you, look, your body's shutting down, like that's serious shit. How did you build your way back from that?
I went into basically my room and was like, mate, you gotta fix your stuff. You gotta work out what you want to do, because realistically, I was like, if I do get out of this and I do recover, what am I even going to do with my life? And then that question was like, what are you going to do with your life if you get out of here alive, basically? And I was like, well, I'm not going to play football again because I'm not good enough, right? So I just parked football. I was like, what do I want to do with my life? And I was like, I want to go out and I want to, because I'd already been working at Happiness Code doing stuff in the mental health space. And I was like, I want to do that. And then it became, okay, if you want to do that, well, you've got to be living that life. You've got to become that person. So what does that look like? So I went back through my values and what I stood for, who I wanted to be as a person. And then, what was the person that, I aspire to be when I'm older, but also what person would I love to have my kids like respect me for? And I was like, I just want to be genuine, kind, and empathetic. So then I was like, all right, well, that's the foundations of who I am as a person, but that's the foundation of my actions. And then I was like, well, what do I want to do? I want to help other people in the space of self-esteem, self-worth, and basically believing in themselves. So then I just dedicated the amount of time, the rest of the time that I was in the hospital with the other people that I was in there with, which were all younger than me. And I was just like, all I'm going to do is help them work out themselves, who they are. And I guess that's when I really dove into what we talked about earlier about the self-development and where it comes from. And we were doing things like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy when we were in there. So I just dived in more on that to understand that, understanding, what is self-awareness, what is emotional regulation. I just dove into the positive side of things. And that's where I really started to, I guess, open up and develop. And then the other thing was, mate, I read a book which no one would probably, not too many people would even know it exists. And it's a book by Tom Boyd, and it's his autobiography. He was an AFL player that was the #1 draft pick, went all through these things. And one of the paragraphs or chapters, he talks about body image and skin folds and that sort of thing. And I was like, oh, someone else was going through this at the exact same, not the exact same time, but went through this in the same thing that I did. Okay, so this is actually things that other people are going through at the same level that I went through it. I was like, oh, okay, well, that means there's other people going through so many other things in their life. So it became a thing like, well, that you hear that, I guess, quote that everyone's gone through something, or there's people that have been through what you're going through right now. So I was like, well, maybe I can be the one that helps other people and starts to normalize that, mental health's a real thing or body image is a real thing in males. But that book was like, made me realize that, people are going through things that we have no idea about. So how can I help them to then not let these circumstances, situations, challenges, obstacles, trauma affect them as people and still build them up to believe in themselves, but actual, real, authentic belief, not this fake belief, but actually just be genuine, kind, empathetic people. So that's where that all sort of stemmed from. And then, mate, the passion that I had through that and the purpose it was giving me, which is a big thing, like having that purpose again in life. I haven't looked back since I've started doing that. And that's why I've been doing what I've been doing for, the last 3 years.
How has your relationship with yourself matured and changed in those 3 years?
You still sort of beat yourself up a little bit, but I have now, I guess, realised that I've realised that, you know, being genuine, being kind, being empathetic to other people is very important to do that to myself. And I've accepted that I'm a soft dude, man. Like, that's just who I am. That's my nature. And owning that and just acknowledging that, like, I love to have open, vulnerable conversations, but I love to be caring and empathetic. And I guess just being able to accept that part of me as well, and not the traditional traits of a man to be strong and bold and courageous and all that stuff. I'm like, it's just not me. And I know that I beat myself up when I'm not being myself. Especially in the last year, that's when I really realized when I'm not happy with myself, or I'm getting like criticizing myself or judging myself, it's because I'm not owning who I really want to be as a person. Yeah, and I'm not living by that sort of guy. And that's when I know, like, all right, I got to get back to just being myself. That's been pretty rewarding, if that makes sense.
How do you define your own sense of masculinity?
Wholeness of all things. Now I'm not. I'm still working it out and still developing that, but for me, it's just being whole. It's embracing. It's like the yin and the yang. Realistically, like, yes, I'm strong and bold and courageous in certain areas, but I'm also soft, caring, loving in that aspect as well. And I think for me, embracing the masculinity, I don't say I'm masculine, I don't say I'm feminine, I just say I'm whole, which is having all of these entwined together and being able to actually know when I need to be soft, nurturing, and caring, but also knowing when I need to be strong, bold, and brave. Like, strong, bold, and brave doesn't have to mean I need to be able to lift 150 kilos on a bench press. But being strong and bold is opening up and expressing certain things and challenges that I'm going through. Like, that's some bold and courageous stuff. I take strength as well. So that's when I know that I'm being a true man to myself, and basically being Brayden is just when he's being whole and embracing all those elements of life and traits that we all need to experience and all need to own and accept. And for me, that's just what it is for me, I guess.
Yeah. And you've pushed through that misconception that many of us have, which is that the strong thing to do is to force it down and pretend like it's not there and just keep on pushing on, no matter how destructive that is for us and others. When the reality is that the strong thing to do and the thing that's going to be best for you and everyone else is to face it. And as hard as that is, actually accept it, admit to whatever it is, to admit that you can't do life all on your own and that's fine and that doesn't make you any less of a man. And we know that that is actually the strongest thing you can do, because so many of us can't do it. I mean, you couldn't do it for all those years. I've certainly had times in my life where I haven't been able to do it. And so that's how you know it's strength, and it's something that's really difficult to do, because we're much better at forcing things down and pushing stuff under the rug. We can do that a lot easier than we can actually front up to whatever it is. So that's how you know it's a strength, not a weakness.
Exactly right. I appreciate that, man. It is, yeah, but it's like you said, it's a hard thing to, still accept and acknowledge for certain people, which I completely and utterly understand as well. Because like you said, it took me a while.
But seeing examples, that's why we do this show, and it's why you do a lot of the work you do. That's why Boyd's book made a huge difference for you, is you actually need to see and hear the examples of people like you talking about going through whatever it is to realise, like, oh, I'm not special, I'm not an outlier, I'm just human. And we usually can't actually figure that out just on our own. How do you deal with the impulse control and the obsessive side of your nature? Because I haven't had an eating disorder, but I imagine you can't just switch it off. So I know that you changed your mindset, but how do you cope with that part of your brain that wants to do more, eat less?
It came back to my why, and that's all I remind myself. If I'm in a gym session or doing a run, or I'm about to go for I love long distance running, right? So say I'm going to go for a long distance run, and in the morning I'm like, I'm just got no appetite here. I just don't want to eat. And then, which happens, right? And I'm just like, who's the person that I'm trying to be, and what's my why? My why is to be able to help and impact as many people as I can in my life. But then my why with running is, why do you want to run? Well, I've got some cool goals that I want to achieve in running. Is not eating or over exercising going to help me do that? No, because I need to fuel my body to be able to perform at the best it can. Is me going to the gym for 5 hours and not eating food, is that going to then help me perform when I go on stage and present? No, because I'm going to be tired. I'm going to probably be hangry because I haven't had enough food. And then I'm going to be fatigued. My focus isn't going to be there. All that sort of stuff. So it just comes back to my why. And why am I here? It's because I want to show up. I want to help other people. If I'm not doing the things that, if I keep doing the things that got me into my darkest place, I'm not going to be able to do my why. Realistically, because my partner, Jules, with my boss, he'll be like, no, but I can't have you going out running these workshops because you're a liability to us, because you're not healthy. We don't know what's going to happen. And so there's so many different aspects. It's like, why do I need to do this? And who's the person I want to become? And what's my deep desire within myself is to be a genuine, kind, empathetic dude that just wants to make the world or someone else's day better. So when I have these tendencies, these thoughts, am I being genuine? Am I being kind? Am I being empathetic towards myself and others? No. Am I going to make the world better or someone else's day better if I fall back into those things? No. Okay, well, let's do this. Let's do what we need to do. We do what the so-called right thing is to do.
So you have to take the time to have those conversations with yourself.
Yeah, and that's scary. Like sitting by yourself, like I love it now. Solitude is one of my favorite things to do, and I do that most mornings and every night. So every night I go for a walk, and that's just to decompress the day, things that have popped up, not to do with eating disorder, but to do with anything that's popped up. No headphones in and no phone, and it's incredible because you're just with your own thoughts. And sometimes like anything can pop up, but that's really been big for me, is having that time and space of solitude.
That element of control, which has been so big for you, where you've had to control everything and it's run your whole life. How do you go relinquishing that? Or are you conscious of when you're being controlling with yourself, or trying to sort of come off the accelerator a bit with that and be kinder and just push back against that?
Yeah, I've just been kinder with it. And control, there's still obviously areas of my life that I can control and want to control. But when it comes to, food and exercise, it's released a lot, to the point where if I, like going out for dinner or going to someone else's house for dinner was pretty scary, obviously, as you would understand, through what I went through. But now it's, I communicate that with the person. Look, yes, I'm super keen to come over for dinner, like at a mate's house, but I've also been able to be like, mate, like, this is what I've been through. Like, I've got some things with eating. Don't worry about what you cook. I'll eat whatever you cook. But just know if I get a little bit antsy, a little bit funny, it's because of this. Okay. So I just communicate it now, man. And that's what it comes back to for me, is communication. But I've also, I don't know if it's just happened through over time now, but I actually now get excited. Like my mate called me up and I went to his house for dinner a month ago and he's like, oh, what do you want? I'm like, no, man, like, cook whatever you want. Like, I'm just keen to come over and chat and communicate and have connection, because, so many things at the moment. People connect over, some sort of drink. If it's coffee, if they go and have beers or whatever, smoothies, juices, but then people connect over food too, or let's go get this and like whatever it might be. So I'm like, well, if I get so caught up in food, what I'm drinking, what I'm putting into my body, then I'm going to lose connection as well. So for me, mate, I don't, at the moment, I still do care about what I eat or what I put into my body, but it's more about connection.
Yeah.
What's this actually not going to help me do? Or it's not going to help me connect with one of my closest mates. Like, nah, I'm not going to let food if I have a bloody steak or if I have chicken or fish dictate if I cannot connect with this person. So that's been another thing too.
Priorities and balance, and then you're obviously in a good way mentally at the moment now too, which you can't underrate. I mean, a big part of the reason why you were doing what you were doing when you were in the grip of that illness is because you weren't able to think the way you're thinking now, because you were getting progressively sicker without realising it. But yeah,
Literally,
I
exactly.
think it's so good to hear this story of a man talking about this eating disorder, and part of the reason I was keen to talk to you. I've done hundreds of episodes with men talking about every problem you can think of, and I've never met a man who was speaking openly about having anorexia. But I know that there's so many of them out there, and that makes it all the more important to talk about it, because there's so many young guys out there who have this, who aren't fully accepting it, or who are thinking that they need to be so embarrassed because they're the only bloke who's ever had this particular eating disorder. And so it's so important to hear your story and to hear the way that you've navigated it and where you're at now. And yeah, I think from going from where you were to where you are, and then this drive that you've now got to help other people and be brave and use your story, and to a degree, keep on focusing on it, even though there's a lot of pain there, but trying to utilize that and turn it into something. I take my hat off to you, man. We need more men like you out there being role models. So well done.
I don't know what to say, man. That means a lot. Yeah, it really does. And yeah, but I'm sorry, bro. I'm a bit taken away. It's such a nice compliment. To hear that from another man, it means a lot. For you to say such a kind and warming compliment to me, I'm very grateful for. And I'm just very grateful you gave me the opportunity to come on here and express, my life, my story, and from my own experiences. And I really appreciate that, man. So thank you very much. I've loved every minute of it.
That's it for this episode. If you like what we're all about, support us by following Youngblood Men's Mental Health on Instagram and Youngblood Mental Health on TikTok. Every podcast episode is recorded in professional quality video, and they're all up on our Youngblood Men's Mental Health YouTube channel. So please show some love and subscribe. You can find everything there is to know about the podcast at youngbloodmensmentalhealth.com. And most importantly, please share these stories with anyone in your life who needs to know they're not alone. We're all in this together. Catch you next time.